Welcome everyone to our panel discussion about Nordic and German pathways towards a low carbon transition. How will innovation shape the future? Organized by Konrad Adenauer Foundation Regional Program Nordic Countries, together with a group of young and motivated scholarship holders that are connected to the foundation. CAS is a political foundation named after the first Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, and with more than 80 offices abroad and projects in 120 countries, CAS actively promotes the values of freedom, justice, and solidarity around the globe. The Nordic Countries project of CAS, based in Stockholm in Sweden, strengthens the ties between Germany and the Nordic countries by promoting political dialogue, organizing political conferences, and further improvement of cooperation with think tanks, NGOs, and the civil society. In this panel discussion, we would like to talk about a topic that concerns us all in the Nordics as well as in Germany, but also globally, as our societies are threatened by a changing climate and its effects on our natural environment and humanity. The latest results of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, are pretty clear. It's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. Widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, ocean, cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. Human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. Evidence is observed changes in extremes such as heat waves, heavy precipitation, droughts, and tropical cyclones. And in particular, the attribution to human influence has strengthened since the last reports that were published around 6 years ago. We believe that innovation can be one key element in the response to these challenges. That is why in this panel discussion, together with our representatives from the Nordics and Germany, we will take up the question of how innovation will shape our common future. However, before we start with the discussion, Christian Hübner, the head of the Regional Program Energy Security and Climate Change Asia and Pacific, will give us a short keynote about global climate policy and also about his work with decarbonization in Asia, which will hopefully provide an impetus for the subsequent panel discussion. I will hand over now to Christian.
Thank you, Leonie. Dear panelists, dear participants, it's really a pleasure and honor for being here and giving you a brief impulse for the discussion in more or less 30 minutes. I'm going to share now my screen. So I prepared a short PowerPoint presentation. As Leonie already introduced, the topic is global climate politics and decarbonization in Asia Pacific. I will going to talk a bit about two basic topics. First, very brief introduction or giving you some context on climate politics. And the second part will be more on decarbonization. And here I'm going to highlight a bit more what's going on in Asia Pacific and in terms of decarbonization, and try to link it to the topic of innovation, which is the basic topic for the discussion later. So I think there's almost currently no possibility to start a presentation on climate change without mentioning the recent IPCC report. It's almost more than almost 4,000 pages. So, but they're very good summaries, and I really recommend to have to look to this. Leonie already mentioned a few parts of it. Why is it important to know this document? I tried to bring it down very brief. Again, climate change is happening due to rising greenhouse gas emission caused by human activities. Climate change is dangerous, and the damage, for instance, extreme weather events, are very, very costly in an economic sense. But there's hope. We can still smooth it down, but time is really running out for doing this, and every fraction of a degree counts in this regard. With this, I leave it here in terms of climate science. For me, the facts are quite clear, and we have to do something on it. But that jumped me to global climate politics. We are almost 2 months before the next COP, which will take place this year in Glasgow. The last really big and important event on climate politics around the world has been taking place in Paris. Global governance agreed to the so-called Paris Agreement, which means hold global mean warming to well below 2 degrees and pursue efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. It was a very important event, which gives really a path to the future of climate policy all around the world. And a very crucial aspect of this conference was a decision for so-called national determined contribution, which are the national plans of each party of the UNFCCC, how they would like to contribute to this Paris Agreement. I think what you can see so far is that these national determined contribution are really driver for low carbon emission path. But if you watch out a bit to the plans and try to count down how many carbon will be avoided, it is definitely not enough. And the next COP in Glasgow will be very important COP, because it is 5 to 6 years after the Paris Agreement, and that will be the first round where updated or newly submitted NDCs has to be shown, and that's a very important aspect to see where we stand here. I think this is all the Paris Agreement. I leave it here because I would like to phase out a bit more to decarbonization strategies. And but before I do this, let me break it down. So the EU goal is respond to the Paris Agreement. Global climate politics was the Green Deal. The EU wants to become climate neutral continent by 2050. These climate neutral or carbon neutrality pledges, which we see currently all around the world, are very important. 2050 is as well a very important year to achieve this. And this is quite promising that beside the NDCs, which are crucial for climate policy, we see as well a lot of carbon neutrality pledges from many countries around the world, and as well other entities like companies or civil society groups. The question is here, where is it most important going on? So the EU has very ambitious goals, and I think what they have decided so far, the recent Fit for 55 package, is really a very promising approach. A lot of measures are on its way now. But maybe it's more important as well to watch out to Asia. Asia is the region where most energy is consumed currently, and the economy is quite dynamic. And due to this, it is important if we want to understand better or we want to really respond to the climate change and its threats, it's important to understand how Asia is doing in terms of climate politics. I think it is well known that China aims for carbon neutrality by 2060. Was quite a move, I think. It's not 2050, but if China is really able to hold this promise, I think it will make a huge difference. Not so surprisingly, Japan and South Korea announced only shortly later its own carbon neutrality targets 10 years before, by 2050. Not surprisingly, because both economies are very close linked to the China economy, and I think this economic gravity forces, it is important that they have some common climate policy in place. But other countries, important player, especially in terms of emission, Indonesia. Indonesia, the discussion is still going on, whether they will have some kind of zero targets or not. It is optimistic about to have some carbon neutral goal by 2060, but the discussion is very volatile. A few weeks ago, I remember they have talking about 2070. So it is quite dynamic. Maybe there might be something more coming before the COP in Glasgow. Other country in Southeast Asia is Thailand, who proposed carbon neutrality by 2065, 2050, 70, and betting on carbon capture and sequestration.
Ich bin in einem Castellanos-Text.
Sorry. So this is just a discussion, though there's no decision done by Thailand in this regard. And another big player, of course, is India became under a lot of pressure in the beginning of this year when the US has this big climate conference, a bit like coming back in the international climate community. And there was a lot of discussion about going on whether India is going to announce as well some kind of carbon neutrality target or not. It hasn't done it yet. It is insisting currently on its current Paris Agreement pledges. So as you can see here, the discussion in Asia is quite diverse, but there are some promising signals that many countries really want to make some difference in terms of carbon emission. Here, just to come back to the question of the importance of energy. Most energy globally currently is consumed in Asia, and energy is as well the major cause for global greenhouse gas emission, more than 75% in this amount. So that's why I think it's really important that we have a deep look into decarbonization policy and strategies and find really good solutions which help us to bring carbon emission or greenhouse gas emission down in an appropriate way to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement objectives. I will do this here in this presentation on 5 areas which I think are important. This is very subjective selection by me. There are probably more, but I think they are very important. So I'm going to talk a bit more about old resources. This is on coal, oil, and gas. I'm going to talk a bit about new resources, which are critical minerals, which are essential for energy transition. I'm going to talk about hydrogen, which is currently one of the biggest political topics, not just in Europe, as well in Asia. I'm going to talk a bit more about decarbonization grids, maybe the area where we see currently most innovation taking place. And least, but I'm going to talk a bit more about carbon pricing, something this is always a topic in Europe and is, I think, starting now with much more dynamic as well in Asia Pacific. So old resources. What you can see here on this graph, very yellow, is the coal production by region and the consumption by region. And the yellow part is from a global perspective, Asia Pacific. So coal is a big thing in Asia Pacific. Many countries are using it. The major player in this regard is China. What I wanted to tell with this graphic is that fossil fuels or coal or gas are major energy resources which will be used for a period of time in Asia Pacific in the energy sector. Also, at the same time, a big player like India or China and others in Asia Pacific are really the global driver for renewable energy. But nevertheless, there are really a lot of reasons why I don't assume that the use of coal or oil or gas is not going that fast down. Countries are now accepting that taking these resources as stranded assets. There are energy security concerns behind it if a country is owning a lot of resources like coal. And of course, there's the question of energy poverty, which needs very low cost energy supply. So that actually means we have to talk about other solutions, how we can bring emission from these resources down. Most prominent technology currently under discussion is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Here on the graph, you see just some kind of CO2 carbon pipeline. So carbon's emission from energy-intensive industries or from the energy sector can technically be separated. They can be stored in the land or on the sea. They can, of course, utilized in industry processes. I think for Asia Pacific, it is an important technology that needs to be explored, and it is currently under high investigation. A lot of investments are done in China, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, Australia. A lot of countries doing a lot and try to understand how they can use it for their energy system and bring down carbon emission. But on the other side, I think it will still take a time until we are in the stage where we can really efficiently use these kind of technology. So this is for old resources. Now jump over to new resources. As I said, here we see an interesting development. We see a rise of demand for energy transition minerals. They are necessary for constructing batteries, for electric mobility, for wind power plants, for solar panels. The critical minerals are rare earth, silicon, or cobalt, or copper. What I just want to highlight with this graph is it's a bit that the market dynamic we see here, that maybe fossil resources like coal, the revenues from this production are going down, and maybe the demand is going down as well. On the same side, we see a rise of other minerals which might come along with other challenges we should have in mind right now, before later we face problems which should have been avoidable. What I say is that we need to use these energy transition minerals really in some kind of a circular way. And when we start constructing wind plants, solar panels, or batteries, we really need to think before by reducing these materials really to a very low level. We need to think what happens to solar panel, for instance. If they are not efficiently anymore in one country or in one area, we might use them in other countries and reusing them. And of course, we need to understand better how we can recycle these commodities for reusing these minerals. I think it's a very, very important topic for or a very, very big innovation area with a lot of business opportunities in the economy. Number C is hydrogen. I said this before, it's a big topic now. Almost each country has now, or many countries have hydrogen strategies. A lot of multilateral and national entities are currently exploring and doing research how they can use hydrogen. Hydrogen is a very, very useful resource. We can storage energy and you can transport it easily. It is used for electricity generation. It is used in the heavy industry. It is used as fuel for transport, for instance. You can use it for heat supply, and I think currently it's mostly used in the chemical industry. But as a bit like the energy transition minerals, it comes a bit with a but we should have in mind before we use it. That's why I think it's an important decarbonization area too. There are many possibilities how you can use hydrogen. You cannot use it in a very sustainable way if you use renewable energy to generate hydrogen and then reuse it for electricity generation or other purposes. But there are much more other opportunities how you can gain hydrogen. You can do it with coal. You can by using other fossil fuels, but then taking a carbon capture sequestration method, that is blue hydrogen, for instance, or you can use it with nuclear power. So there are many discussion going on currently. This is a color game here. My perception is that in Europe, this turns out is going more to green hydrogen, whereas I think in Asia, the discussion is going more into using some intermediate hydrogen, maybe brown or blue or gray, just to develop this technology and infrastructure, and then later use maybe green hydrogen. This is a bit my perception I have here currently in this regard. Interesting, I think, is here. So who is currently leading around the world? So I found an interesting study that there are 228 announced projects now. It is not that much if it's globally perceived, but interesting is that Europe is really leading currently in terms of project with a lot of distance to Asia and North America, these hydrogen projects. I think it's interesting, a lot of hydrogen economy, business sector or industry application, giving a lot of space for a lot of innovation. It starts with the question how we would do, how you want to transfer, or how you want to change this, and which kind of transport fuel. So there are ammonia and other opportunities, and you can transport it easily because there is already an infrastructure there. But the same way, of course, some geopolitical question raised up here again. I know this discussion from Europe that Europe knows that they're not able to provide enough green hydrogen, so they need some more from maybe North Africa or other African countries. In Asia, the relation might develop a bit different here, so that Australia might be one of major supplier for hydrogen, and maybe by different colors. Or whereas Japan, South Korea might be major demander or importer, and China, who's currently the biggest hydrogen producer, will use it basically for its own demand. But this is a really young sector, and that needs some more observation to see where it will develop. But I think hydrogen is a crucial resource for decarbonization. Grids, I said it when that might be the area with most possibilities for innovation. With decarbonization or energy transition policy, it will change drastically from the production side. A few large power plants will transform to many small power producer. Centralized market system will become more decentralized or distributed. The infrastructure will change. Maybe we need more energy electrification grids in the interregional level. And we got away from a top-down approach to a mix-up both direction approach. And of course, we will see in a decarbonized energy world a much more active stakeholder who are involved in the energy system, who need grids, whether physically or as kind of virtual power plants, which is another big issue here. I think this is really one of the most interesting points in terms of innovation, because I see a lot of other developments from the digitization sector in terms of blockchain application, use of artificial intelligence, or Internet of Things devices, all are really necessary to make this transmission from centralized system to more decentralized or distributed system happening. And that's a lot of business opportunity and a lot of innovation space already there. So it just one further issue. I know this graphic is very bad, but I didn't found anything else, but just want to mention this project again. It's this one major infrastructure grid project that's currently in process in Asia. You might have heard about it. It goes around as well in some public media all around the world. In Australian, the idea that solar energy from North Australia will be transmitted to Singapore and from Singapore maybe as well in the region. This is a big project currently taking place, and I think it's as well quite promising and something we might see in the future a bit more, because Australia is really a place where a lot of renewable energy are available, and if they are able to distribute it in the region, I think it's good development. Yeah, last decarbonization area is carbon pricing. I think it's interesting to watch out what's going on in this field in Asia Pacific. Compared to Europe, it is not that developed, but a lot of dynamics are currently happening here. And I think as well this NDC and development in terms of Paris Agreement is one motivation behind it, or it is a very, very upcoming and prominent measure maybe in terms of reducing carbon emission in a market way. There are already a couple of countries who are using it, like Japan, Singapore, New Zealand, Kazakhstan. It's not just only emission trading system, as well carbon tax approaches, and a couple of other countries have it in consideration, like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and Pakistan. The most recent development is, of course, the national emission trading system of China. Started this year. It's already, with its start, the biggest in the world, bigger than in terms of covering carbon emission than the European market. And it is just covering almost entirely the heat sector. So more sectors might be covered in the future by this too. So this is quite a step, I think, and I'm pretty sure it could be a very crucial instrument in China for doing climate mitigation, emission mitigation. Same time, and I see it a bit here from the other side, if you compare Asian carbon pricing approaches a bit with the European carbon prices, pricing approaches, the European Union adopts the proposal for the new carbon border adjustment mechanism, which mean that commodities which will be imported into the European Union need some kind of carbon price too, which is quietly opposed by many countries in Asia, because they have to pay at least more, and they might lose some markets or feel some problems in terms of international trade. Yeah, I think this is really something that concerns me about a bit, because it really can come up with a big conflict and trade conflict, and I think it's not necessary, because the idea behind this CBAM or carbon border adjustment mechanism is actually to find common ground in terms of climate change policy. But this is definitely a space for trade conflicts. I see as well in this whole carbon pricing area an area of innovation. There's much more reporting necessary when it comes to measuring, reporting, and verification processes. We see more offset markets. We see more need for carbon tracking. This is not just for the mandatory markets. This as well for the voluntary markets. A lot of private sector and business communities really, there are a lot of voluntary initiatives who are doing a lot on this, and there's a lot of space as well for new technology. Maybe blockchain might be as well something here for tracking carbon emission. So this is actually all at this moment from my side. I am coming to the end as well with much to my time. Just to a brief wrap up. I talked a bit about climate change. I came down to Paris Agreement and net zero targets as a recent and global policy to fight climate change. And then I break it down a bit to some decarbonization areas which might be very promising in terms of innovation. And I mentioned here old resource world like coal and oil and gas. I break it down to the critical minerals, new resources. I talked about a bit hydrogen, then grids, maybe the most innovative space. And then at least I talk about carbon pricing. So I know it's not all, there are much more interesting spaces, but I think it might hopefully give you a good impulse for the discussion later. And with this, I give it back to Leonie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your very interesting insights in the decarbonization strategies, let's say, in Asia. And you have also triggered some questions here. Let's start with this one. Are there initiatives of the EU or Germany to support the Asian Pacific area regarding a sustainable development?
Yeah, there are many initiatives with many countries in Asia Pacific. There are huge cooperation with India, for instance. There are huge cooperation with a couple of countries in Southeast Asia, where they really try to work together to develop the deployment of renewable energy. I haven't talked about it much in my presentation on renewable energy because I concentrated more on other challenges. I mentioned it a bit in the side sentence, but currently most renewable energy deployment takes place in China and that's quite promising. No, I think it's an important issue that Germany and Europe is working together with Asia Pacific on cooperation for low carbon development.
Thank you. And with this, I think we're ready to start into our panel discussion. Thank you very much, Christian. You're of course welcome to stay and listen in and ask questions, of course. I would like to hand over to our moderator of today, Priscilla Schelp. She will introduce you to our participants and lead the discussion. And we're waiting for your questions as well that you can ask to the panelists.
Thank you, Leonie, for having us. I'm very excited because we have 4 amazing panelists here today. So I will introduce them. And then we have a discussion of 40 minutes, and then actually you have 30 minutes time to ask them any question you want. So yeah, let's start. So first of all, I want to introduce you to Dr. Marco Schletz. Marco, you describe yourself as a climate changer and blockchain enthusiast. Can you tell us a bit more about your personal pathway working with climate action and what you are doing now?
Sure, thank you, Priscilla, and great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So I think maybe to start off with a small disclaimer, it has been a very windy road and very random in terms of like how my career has developed. So I never planned anything and just everything happened by accident, which I'm actually really happy about because I like where I am and I couldn't have planned it myself. So it kind of started at the UN Environment Program, where I was working for like a research collaboration center between UN Environment and the Technical University of Denmark. And I came in with as like a fresh, young, idealistic person that wanted to work with like carbon markets, climate finance and transparency, so carbon accounting. But I quite immediately got very frustrated with the rigidity of the existing system and how slow things, just everything like worked. And then despite this climate emergency situation that we're in, so I was just like, let's go. But everything like was just very slow moving. And at the same time, I discovered like the realm of cryptocurrencies for me, and specifically blockchain, and with like Ethereum, the first decentralized platform coming in. It was a really exciting and innovative space that was rapidly growing and kind of evolving. And so at some point, everyone in the UN started speaking about blockchain and putting it on websites and saying, oh yeah, we're using this technology. And I was just sitting there like, no, this doesn't make sense. You can't use a blockchain for that. And I was rewarded for that criticism with them offering me a PhD to investigate and saying like, yeah, if you're so smart, yeah, what can we actually use it for? And so I spent my PhD working on identifying like what this technology is actually good for and how can we use it to accelerate climate innovation. And that was in partnership with the Unity Partnership and TU Berlin, so like a cross-country collaboration. And yeah, now I think I'm describing myself as an accidental academic because yeah, I don't see myself really as an academic, but I like investigating this innovative technology without really a business model in mind, and just being free to explore. And that's kind of what I'm still doing. So I'm working on climate action, climate accounting, climate finance, and clean energy, now being based in the US, in North Carolina right now. And yeah, trying to accelerate these solutions. I think we'll get more into detail. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marco. But accidental academic, I need to remember that. That's a good one. So yeah, next one is Jay Hennessy. Jay, thanks for making it on the panel on such short notice. Jay, you are a senior project leader for the Missions Innovations Net Zero Compatibility Initiative and a researcher at RISE Research Institute, Sweden. Can you tell us about the global initiative for accelerating innovation and how it relates to shift the focus at COP26 with the launch of the UNFCCC Innovation Hub?
Thank you, Priscilla, and it's a real pleasure to be able to join you at short notice and discuss these questions with everyone. Just to explain a little bit about Mission Innovation, it was launched also at COP21 in Paris as a coalition of countries representing 80% of emissions, with an aim to substantially increase investments in clean energy innovation. And we talk a lot about innovation here today, I think. In 2018, a few years later, Sweden proposed and launched Mission Innovation's Net Zero Compatibility Initiative, as you have rightly said, as a framework for identification and acceleration of 1.5 degree compatible innovations. And we've seen an extraordinary amount of support for this approach, both within Europe, but also globally, and not least have partnered with the UNFCCC to develop what is the UNFCCC's Innovation Hub to be launched, as you said, at COP26. And this is really important as it demonstrates and represents a shift in the discussion from an approach of technology substitution, often, in order to reduce emissions from existing polluters, and typically with a supply side focus, towards a more human needs-based approach that can identify clusters of solutions that includes technology solutions, but also business models, policy and financial instruments, and leadership. And this is with a view to providing flourishing lives for 11 billion people on this planet. So through the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative, we encourage this shift in thinking in practical ways in order to deliver basically the kind of transformative innovation that we really need to have a chance to reach our climate goals.
Thank you, Jay. That's an interesting view, and I think you will talk about that later a bit more. As the next one, I want to introduce you to Janne Peljo. So, yeah, you are the project director of Climate and Nature Solutions, a focus area at the Finnish innovation fund Sitra, and you have a background in business and economics. So in your work at Sitra, how do you bring together climate change mitigation and economic growth to create sustainability?
Thank you. Maybe it's worthwhile to briefly introduce to our audience to Sitra as well. As some of you might know, Sitra is, of course, the kind of Finnish innovation fund which serves the Finnish Parliament. So our mandate is to promote sustainable future and sustainable well-being for Finland. And in that regard, of course, climate change and climate and environment topics are of course, at very prime. But to your original question, how I see is that basically climate change is the defining challenge of the century, and solutions to that one or to it are the greatest investment opportunity we have faced basically since the Industrial Revolution. So by definition, if you look at kind of from the economics perspective and standpoint, investments are those that create economic growth, and halting the climate crisis requires massive investments. So in that regard, that's going to cause significant economic growth. But instead of focusing on whether it would be kind of economic growth or degrowth, I think the real question is that if we really can embark on the transition to cleaner and more sustainable economy fast enough to really create prosperity and sustainable well-being, kind of regarding climate change mitigation, the good news is that we really already have the technologies and the outlook of the technologies that are going to be required. And most of them are extremely competitive already as we speak. So kind of the real question is that whether we can really tackle the challenge and kind of a step forward as a global kind of globally to really create more sustainable well-being and prosperity.
Thank you a lot, Janne. So last but not least, we come to the co-founder and leader of the Klimaunion, Heinrich Strößenreuter. So yeah, very interesting. What's the story behind founding the Klimaunion, and what are your goals?
Yeah, thanks, Priscilla. The Klimaunion is like a kind of NGO within the Conservative Party, CDU in Germany. The first ideas to start that one at last year in fall, and the reason behind that was that we have elections right now on mental level in Germany, and in fall last year it was very clear that there would be a coalition between CDU and the Green ones. So in terms of meet the Paris Agreement, it was very important to attract more Paris-conform climate policies within the CDU environment, so pushing them towards a 1.5 limit. So that was the reason to found the Klimaunion. Basically, we managed very quickly to get into contact with the top politicians within the CDU. The probably next Minister of Economy, Friedrich Merz, we could involve with him within 4 energy dialogues and could bring him the message about how cheap like solar or wind energy is right now in comparison to brown or black coal. We could talk or convince them about that it's basically not a question of new technology, but about deliberalization of the energy market. So free the market, and that's his like basic rhetoric he has. And finally, we could manage a position paper, which was ready for publish in the end of June and would have helped the CDU to win the election But unfortunately, they couldn't decide themselves. Middle of July, we had the big flooding in Germany with 180 people died at that one. And since then, the polls push the CDU into like a decline. And so finally, in the end of August, the CDU published those papers, made them the turbo of the renewable energies, so-called by Armin Laschet. But media didn't pick up, so it was a little bit too late, and probably the CDU will go now into the opposition. That's my perspective right now, because they didn't respond to the climate challenge within this election phase. So the goal of this paper is to produce 100% clean energy within 10 years, from today 250,000 terawatt hours towards 1,500 terawatt hours, basically by de-liberalization of the energy market and bringing some little innovations into that one, but basically no new technologies, no new innovation terms of technology are needed. So that's probably the same what Jane you told before. So that will be the same pathway.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think we have a lot of brain knowledge experience here. So thanks a lot, Leonie, for, getting this panel together, and also thanks to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for, enabling us to have this event. We have also different country perspectives. So basically we have Germany, we have US, Germany, and I think it was Denmark, right? And then we have Sweden and we have Finland, and also this mission innovation countries. So we will have also a look at how the different countries are performing later. Let's get into the discussion, and I will start with you, Marco. So in your PhD, you developed blockchain use to accelerate climate change mitigation. So which technologies in that area do you think have the biggest potential on climate change mitigation?
Thanks, Priscilla. Maybe I can just echo a few points that Jay and Heinrich have been raising, because I think it also feeds very much into the narrative. So Jay, just to mention that my organization, the Open Earth Foundation, is also part of the UNFCCC Innovations Hub, and kind of like working on the climate data infrastructure there. So it's funny how you have all these overlaps in this climate area. And Heinrich, I really like your point on the deliberalization of the energy sector. And I think this is like a global trend that we see in a lot of different regions. And then maybe that feeds into like your question, because there we have a technology stack now that enables a totally different creation of new systems. So by design, our old systems were very centralized, with like one entity being in charge of data, like for example, Facebook in the internet space. But you have the same in the energy space as well. And through blockchain, and then also other technologies like, for example, IoT, Internet of Things, devices like smart meters that enable the automatic collection of data. And then, machine learning and AI is also, I think, another hype buzzword that is applied a lot. But I think it creates like a technology stack that enables us to really redesign the system architectures that we're using right now, and enable us to really come up with new designs. And I think that's what I'm broadly most excited about, to think about how can we redesign these systems so that they become more inclusive, and that actors that haven't been interacting can interact now, like on a peer-to-peer basis now. Like we speak about peer-to-peer in the context of Airbnb or Uber, but like enabling such things for other sectors as well, like peer-to-peer energy trading, I think is a very like good one to name here, and where you actually have true decentralization. So I think that's like the technology stack. And then I have applied that in the realm of carbon accounting is one thing, climate finance, and then also the energy sector. And I think energy is a really interesting field, because we have like a global movement to more decentralized and resilient systems, and that can now be supported by the technology stack. And maybe one last thing I want to flag as well is that I sound like the technology guy that wants to come in and solve everything with blockchain, but I think that's the totally wrong approach. I think it's really important to understand like what are the needs and what are the requirements of the system that we want to change, and how are they currently limited, and how can we improve them over time. and then thinking about what the technologies can enable. And often like the technologies won't help, and it's more like a human problem that we need to solve first in order to create new systems. So yeah, I just also wanted to highlight that. And yeah, back to you, Priscilla.
Yes, so somehow, Leonie, I cannot start my video. I think you need to activate it again.
Now you should be able to.
We can hear you, Priscilla. So I don't know, maybe it's easiest if you just, no, you're back now, yeah.
Yes, yeah, the next one I would like to ask is Jay. So your initiative assessed over 1,000 innovations from around the world under mission innovation with a focus on the 1.5-degree compatibility. Can you tell us which you see as the most essential aspects for identifying and accelerating innovations and how they can meet the needs of 11 billion people?
Thanks, Priscilla. It's a really interesting, it has been really interesting and inspiring also to gather the latest innovations from around the world, including some blockchain solutions and other cutting edge technologies, also business models, and establishing a best practice for assessing avoided emissions is very important, and it's increasingly acknowledged as such, as it enables a common language between innovators and also the users of solutions like cities and those providing financial support and investment also. But I would say that assessing avoided emissions is actually only half the story, and we still see a tendency to aim to identify a relatively small number of innovations that have a very large potential for avoided emissions, and unfortunately sometimes are used as a way for polluters to offset their existing emissions through investments. But that avoids asking how existing businesses will need to adapt themselves, how they will need to change their business models as we go down a 1.5-degree pathway. And perhaps most crucially, actually, it encourages investments in innovations that may avoid emissions in the short term, but are not 1.5-degree compatible. In the worst case, I think these kinds of innovations could actually undermine support for a more granular and demand-driven approach. And we have clear evidence, actually, that granular technologies are much quicker to deploy and lead to more synergies also between the sustainable development goals. So there's a risk that, for example, startups that don't self-identify as having a climate impact and so don't necessarily respond to calls for financial support, and they may actually not have a large avoided emissions potential in the short term, they will be ignored, even though they could lead to systems or to accelerate other innovations that are 1.5-degree compatible. And I think to solve this, we bring this perspective also into the UNFCCC Innovation Hub as a founding partner that's co-developing the hub, where we feel that we need to start asking the question, how does an innovation meet the needs of 11 billion people, as you say? And that means putting human needs at the center of that question. Because many innovations actually that we see today are actually incremental improvements, and many of the innovations that we've assessed through the 1,000 that we have already presented under mission innovation are incremental improvements or optimizations of existing systems that are not 1.5-degree compatible. And this is not a strange thing, because this is what we are actually asking people to come up with as ideas when we structure the support that we provide. So yeah, as I say, many innovations are incremental and potentially also can be used in ways that undermine the development of a 1.5-degree pathway. But taking a step back from that as a broad picture, for many, the first step that's needed is simply to start assessing the impact of innovation, because many are not doing that. We need to start to do that. and we need to do it through a common framework. It's well recognized, it's been well discussed. We've been co-hosting workshops with the European Commission and others where we discuss this as really well understood that there is a need to have a common language around these assessments, and to work towards a common target also for identifying solutions. So I think just to wrap it up, these are the these are kind of the two crucial first steps, I would say, in reaching this perspective of 11 billion people.
Perfect. Thank you a lot, Jay. Very interesting. Next one, Janne. From your work at Citra, what, in your opinion, are the technologies with the most potential?
Yeah, and that's of course a very big question. I would like to say that I pretty much agree or fully agree with what Jay just said before. But I think one of the biggest innovations we really need to tap into is actually the innovation of scaling up things faster. We've been involved in many analyses that just try to highlight what's the potential of better utilizing the innovations and technologies and solutions that already exist, and how much benefits we would gain for just scaling those up faster and better. So it's all about learning and kind of sharing the learnings of different innovations. But going to the technologies, as said, that's kind of the elephant in the room type of question that you really need to chop into smaller pieces to actually digest. In the face of the climate crisis, it's evident that pretty much everything has to change. The way how we produce energy, the way how we consume energy, the way how we transport, the way how we live, the way how we eat, everything has to change by 2050 in order for us to get to net zero, and then beyond to negative emissions. What we've analyzed is that actually a majority of this transformation can be done with the existing technologies. It can be done cost efficiently. For example, when we look at the power sector, you can see that wind and solar are already pretty much in all over the world. They are the most competitive solutions to producing new power production. Looking at the transport sector, you can see that electric vehicles are when measured in total lifetime cost or total cost of ownership measures, they are actually cheapest already today, even though they're kind of out of the shop prices are higher. But when you take the economist point of view on assisting these technologies, you can see that the efficiency gains that these new innovations provide us with are, when translated into financial benefits, are much higher than the exact and actual investment costs. So basically, it's not about the technologies, it's not actually about the finance and economics, it's more about the implementation and the behavioral change that's needed. But when really going into the kind of the tougher questions, the hardest to debate technologies, those are, for example, heavy industry. Kind of how do we create steel and cement and ammonia with processes that don't produce any emissions or only low emissions? And that's where we need initiatives like the Mission Innovation to really dig deeper into these kind of silver bullet or kind of groundbreaking disruptive technologies. The Swedes are currently, with the help of the Finnish counterparts, producing the first batches of fossil-free steel. And this is something that 10, 15 years ago was just unheard of. We are seeing similar disruptive innovations taking place and being developed currently. But the real question is that are we able to implement them as fast as is required, kind of because of the climate science? So for me, that's the biggest question.
Okay, thanks, Janne. The last one, I think Heinrich is already ready to agree with you that it needs to go fast. And so my question to you is, you provide very innovative proposals with the Klimaunion. What do you think are the most urgent innovations and that we need to implement in the next years?
Thank you. I will focus on like market and political innovations, not on technical or production innovations, because we have everything already available in shelf. I think one thing is very, very important to have like an obligation for car producers to have bi-directional cars for charging and decharging. So you could produce like in Germany storage of 45 million electrical cars who could like storage and get the electricity, the clean electricity again out. The second thing would be to reduce all taxes on clean energy and storage of those clean energies produced, and to increase the carbon price on the other side, because then the market will drive the change in the speed which we can't deliver by like governmental work. And the third thing is in terms of innovations, governmental innovations would be to speed up all kind of regulation and planning procedures where the government is involved. So if you apply for something or auctions and all this kind of stuff, we have to get in Germany from 5-6 years to 6 months. And there are already some big words within Armin Laschet, with the CEO of the CDU right now. So it seems to me that all political parties competing now in the federal elections are more or less clear on those kind of innovative regulations or innovations, so that we will probably have very quickly a speed up in those kind of clean energy production schemes.
Thank you, Harry. So talking about speed, you said, well, the CDU was a bit slow regarding the change of climate and energy politics. What is the reaction to the realignment of the CDU's energy and climate politics, and how is the potential perceived?
That's like a twofold answer on that one question. Within the like science community, they figure out that there is like within 5 months there was a big change in the policy of the CDU. Nobody would have betted on that one in spring that year. In terms of media coverage, it was up to 100% perceived as a greenwashing too late in the election phase. So it had to come in June or July before the big flooding in Germany. Even at the flooding, there would have been like a window of opportunities for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. We had everything in place and ready. So they just had to push the button. But at the end of August, it was like, okay, now we figure out climate policy could be a measure to win the elections. And so it was cancelled, or it was perceived as a greenwashing issue, unfortunately. But like for all the other parties, there's now a common ground on energy policy. It's more or less the same. And for us as a Klima Union, after the election, I guess the CDU will get into the opposition. We will be probably the strongest NGO in criticizing the government for any kind of measures which are not Paris aligned. So this will be funny for me as a campaigner. Worked for 30 years in environmental and climate issues.
Well, sounds fun. Yeah, there's a future, and I'm sure there will be a lot happening. Let's have a look at some other countries, how far they are, what the specifics are, what the maybe also specific problems are. I would like to start with Marco here. Marco, you are currently working in the US. You worked a bit in Denmark, and I think you were already German. So what can you tell us about like how far Denmark, Germany, and the US are? What are the challenges? And maybe also a bit in the area from you, blockchain, climate action tracking.
Sure. So I think all of these 3 countries are very world leading and very inspiring in terms of what they have been accomplished in a very short time. But I think it's also something that the previous panelists said in their previous comments, is that we need like global innovation and like develop global solutions rather than focusing on like one country. So it's important that a lot of, or basically everyone, especially in the climate system, which is a ecosystem of like insane complexity, because you have national actors that vary widely in their capacity and their technology approach and systems, but then also something like non-state actors and sub-national actors are becoming increasingly important. So thinking about solutions that are not really happening in fragmentation, but like creating global collaboration around these technologies is like the key. And I think here, like the global north, and specifically Denmark, Germany, and the US as well, having a lot of capacity and a lot of talent developing these solutions are in charge and have the responsibility to support global developments. And again, not to increase fragmentation, because our climate systems are very fragmented right now, but to increase like the harmonization of systems. And that means that like the global south is really important to include in the development of these solutions. So I don't know who said it, but like developing a common language around innovation and create capacities and financing models that reflect that is essential for that. And then thinking and reflecting also about the capacities that the global south has. It's not that it is important that Germany or Denmark or the US can apply the solution, but in the climate space, it really matters that the global south can apply this solution, and it makes their life easier so that we develop like inclusive systems. And that also directly relates into climate finance, for example, because it's important that you can do proper emission accounting, or at least the accounting of financing flows, which is currently not possible. So yeah, I kind of avoided your question a bit. I don't want to compare the three countries. I think they're like very much in the same situation, but really highlighting that the global movement is important. And I think it's a sad time in the sense that we are seeing a lot more global fragmentation, and countries are focusing more on their own borders. And I think that's something that COVID has even enhanced, because yeah, with travel restrictions, we limit the exchange a lot more. But we actually, in order to address the climate challenge, we need to create global systems where everyone is collaborating again. And that's the way how we need to approach this challenge.
Marco, thank you a lot. I think it's good to go back to Jay, because Jay is nodding the whole time because he's already working with other countries, right? So mission innovation, I think we're 24 countries and one UN organization, right? So how well is it working, the collaboration? How does it practically look like?
Thanks, Priscilla. Yeah, I think when we consider progress, we are used to thinking in terms of actions we need to take to reduce our negative impact. And we're also used to measuring our progress against targets that focus on this race down to zero. We often do this by trying to make changes to our existing systems. But as I said, I think these existing systems, they may not be 1.5 degree compatible. I think Marco's point on the global south is important here also. And to Jana's point on transformation since the Industrial Revolution, we should recognize that the fourth Industrial Revolution is underway, bringing with it new solutions that can radically transform our societies in ways that we don't anticipate or expect. And these are usually driven by entrepreneurs and other providers of solutions, and less often by those who represent existing sources of emissions. Also, as Jana said, I think we need to accelerate the scale up. But also when we start to focus on providers of solutions and on human needs under a 1.5 degree strategy, we expand this innovation space, and we move away from a static problem-based approach towards a dynamic solution-based approach, which has more potential to react to the changes that we know are coming under the fourth industrial revolution. So, I mean, talking about specific countries, as you said, I can talk about Sweden a little bit here as being a pioneer of this work from the start, and not least through our partnership with the Swedish Energy Agency. Sweden was actually the first country to demonstrate an avoided emissions potential from exports to global markets of more than 1 gigaton of CO2 equivalents in 2030, which is effectively avoiding more than 10 times its own current emissions, and also demonstrates, I think, how I think we see not uncommonly in the small Nordics a feeling that we can't do much more than focus on our own emissions. But I think this demonstrates how a small country in the Nordics can actually have a big impact. And lastly, I think, as Marco said, we need a global approach, and that should include the Global South. So we also work closely with many of the other Mission Innovation members and partners, not least among them is India, with its international incubator under Mission Innovation, and also Chile, both of which have shown similar leadership, I would say, to Sweden in this respect. And you can read about that in our country papers. We've started similar work with other countries, including Germany and others in the Nordics and many around the world. I think this focus on potential avoided emissions from innovations is really key to start to expand this innovation space. And we need to start asking the question, what transformative innovations are out there that are compatible with 11 billion flourishing lives? And I think this is a crucial point, because if we're only looking at our own emissions, we're only looking at what we can do to reduce our emissions as, you know, a small part of Europe, and Europe being a relatively actually small part of emissions globally, then we need to consider how innovations and solutions that we support are relevant to all countries. I think that's really crucial.
Thank you, Jay. I think I would like to go to Janne next. So talking about innovation, so you said you assessed more than 1,000 innovations. I guess they are not all coming from Finland itself, right? So you are having quite some global exposure as well, or? I
believe that was Jay, right?
That's right. But some of those came from Finland, I can say.
Yeah, of course I did.
So can you tell us a bit more about the situation in Finland?
Yeah, I'm happy to, of course. I'd like to underline, of course, that this is not something very new, that we in Finland have a very ambitious climate target. Finland aims to be carbon neutral by 2035 already, and then carbon negative quite soon after. But it's nothing new, as Finland actually was the first country in the world to implement a carbon tax in 1990. So we do have a legacy of climate policy, although it has been picking up quite rapidly in the past years. Our climate laws are just being updated to match the climate ambition level, and also setting the long-term targets in 2040 and 2050. But that said, that's kind of the shield policing or window dressing. We are actually quite ambitious in our climate targets, and we are actually committed to implement on them. But of course, it's not easy for us either. Just earlier this week, our government had their annual budget negotiations, and they had a really tough discussions on how to actually close the gap between the kind of current scenarios and what's required for the 2035 carbon neutrality. And as with, I believe, many countries in the world, especially in Finland, we also face this, that we've already captured quite many of the low-hanging fruits, and now it's going to get tougher in actually getting into the most difficult to abate emissions. And that's when we really need policy innovations. We need to have the courage and the leadership to use both the penalties and the carrots. So sticks and carrots both need to be applied. Otherwise, we won't be able to do this either on time or cost efficiently. And over the course of time, both are very important. But what's what's different in Finland, and I believe this is the same pretty much in all of the Nordic countries, is that actually in Finland the climate policy dialogue, it's not driven by activists. They are of course vocal and they're an important part of this. But it's actually the business confederations and the global exporting businesses that are seeing climate change as a very attractive market opportunity. They have the technologies, they have the solutions. Our home markets in the Nordics, they are still quite small. So if you want to be a big industrial player globally, you have to go outside the Nordics. And that's where kind of what Jay said about the avoided emissions, that's when that comes to play. So basically the narrative in Finland has shifted towards minimizing our own carbon footprint and then maximizing our carbon handprint, which is what we can help, or what we can do to help others to reduce their emissions. So we do see this as both as a requirement for us, but also as a very big business opportunity and an opportunity for growth and economic prosperity for Finland as well. So that's I think what's quite unique yet in a global context.
Okay, thank you, Janne. So we heard a bit from the Nordics, so I would like to go back to Germany. And so we talked about basically that there's cooperation, globalization needed. So Heinrich, how do you ensure that you don't work in your little, in little Germany, but you collaborate with the other countries and act in a global interest, not just in Germany's interest?
By exactly not doing that. I think the core is to create the mass market as fast as possible within Germany as the fourth biggest or strongest economy in the world. And if this works out in Germany, then many others would start to do the same, more or less. So the basic core is to produce companies, to produce middle-sized, small, big companies, whatever, who produce the technology and the services, the IT, whatever you need. And then they could export in other countries. If other countries figure out this works in Germany, then we have a kind of a global domino chain and it works out as well. That's one part of the answer. The other part of the answer is to, in terms of the mathematics of the carbon budget, we already exceed the 1.5 limit, depending on kind of what Wahrscheinlichkeiten auf Englisch, what's that?
Probability.
Yeah, probabilities you calculate. So if you want to keep the German budget goals on a global level, we have to speed up much more faster in terms of export of technologies, financial schemes and stuff. And this is discussion which is not that big enough in Germany, and I guess first we have to solve the political regulation problem, and once we have that on the way and it goes away, then we have to speed up very quickly the other ones. But first solve the problems and the challenge within Germany, and then do the rest. I had the same experience a couple of years ago. I was initiator and manager of the cycling referendum in Berlin, which brought a first cycling law within a big city. And many people were talking, let's start to do this in other cities as well. And I said, no, we have to first fight within Berlin to make change happen here. And right now, as a result of that one, we have up to 50 cycling referendums in other cities because they saw it worked in Berlin. So the core is to make it happen in Germany, and then I guess the rest could speed up much more quicker than if we go too early into to export discussions and stuff.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm always careful with using regulation and quickly in one sentence, but let's see. So we have some questions from the audience. So there's one for you, Heinrich. You said that it took the CDU quite some time to realize the importance of climate change in this election. What do you think were the reasons for that?
Yeah, I think that the party in its upper level has not enough contact, or had not enough contact with activists from the climate movement. So they didn't learn as quickly as the other parties learned. So they still are behaving in beliefs or in knowledge that's 10, 15 years old, and haven't figured out that, for example, you could produce electricity from solar by 1 to 3 cents the hour, or that you could produce wind onshore, offshore around 5, 6, 7 cents the hour. So once they learned that, they also learn that other things or other stuff is possible as well. So basically we have an innovation problem in the party. And on the other side, there are those old kind coal lobbyists who did their work quite well. And they produce a kind of zombie politicians, like walking dead people who still have the belief from 10, 50 years in their mind, but didn't figure out that the situation has changed. And so our most important work was to create a platform where people could talk and learn, and as well to bring up very precise number work, crunching work, and also wordings into the discussion. And this turned out quite well. The CDU is talking about this kind of global domino chain. It's talking about Germany has to become the first industrial economy worldwide to turn climate neutral. So leading them on new talks was one of the issues.
Thank you, Heinrich. So we have a multitasker here, Marco. It's super nice that you answer questions from the Q&A while we are talking. I think that so that everyone kind of can enjoy your answer, I would ask the question again so you can say what you wrote, okay? So the question is green growth possible, or is it just a term used by politicians during election campaigning? Do we need to degrowth? Do we need degrowth instead to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement? So, Marco.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a skill that you need to develop in the Zoom age to participate at different levels. So my response was, and I can maybe briefly read that and elaborate on it. I believe that degrowth is not the right way forward, particularly given the population growth. And that's something that Jay put out there, the number of 11 billion humans that will be living on Earth. And if we stick to that estimate and not dramatically fall off and go back to the Stone Age, there is like no way that we can keep the Earth habitable and provide sufficient living conditions for these people. Then technology is kind of our only way out of that. And I think generally, technology in history has been very good at creating more out of less, kind of like, I mean, if we're looking at farming systems, I don't know how much better the output of farms is becoming over time, but technology has always been kind of like a deflationary source in that sense, that we can create more with less, and that is something that, yeah, the only way forward in that. And one other point, I think Janne was raising that, but that it is important to not only like use sticks, but also like create the systems that foster innovation and incentivize behavior that is like positive towards the global good and kind of like nudge people in the right direction. And at the moment, our systems are still not made for that. I mean, we're still subsidizing fossil fuels like crazy globally, and we are prohibiting the scaling of innovative approaches. We are not currently working or creating the systems to really foster innovation. And I think that's definitely the way forward. And yeah, I see that Janne and Heinrich want to say. I think, Heinrich, you were the first one to raise your hand, so I'll hand it over to you.
I think it was, yeah, it was Heinrich. And I think it's really great that you're doing my job, because basically, yeah, my next question was like, what's your vision and how to get there? So please, Heinrich, it's your turn.
Okay, I try to combine both. What I wanted to say, I think 2/3 comes from technology and growth, and 1/3 comes from personal behavior. We always could decide to fly less or to heat less or whatever. And unless climate neutral flying will probably not be feasible in the next 10 to 15 years, it's just a question of behavior if you want to make changes there. Yeah, the vision is that in the last 2-3 weeks of our election process in Germany, the issue of climate will speed up. We have 10, 15 young people who start to hunger and eat not anymore. So they might die on that one. And this will create a big push in the debate. And then we will have hopefully a new government who takes it serious, the climate challenge, and will bring up very quickly the new regulations to get on the Paris Agreement pathway. So very, very simple, the hope on the new government, and as well as a campaigner to unleash the energy, the power of people, of organizations, of NGOs that will seriously happen.
Thank you. Yeah, hope is important. So we have soon Q&A, so you can all start thinking already and collecting your questions. And Janne, you want to comment as well?
Yeah, I had a brief comment on the kind of the economic growth question. That's something that we've been pondering quite a lot, because in our vision, we want to achieve a society within Finland and then later on globally that is sustainable and produces good quality life and well-being within the planetary boundaries. And what we've witnessed, of course, if you look at the Western industrial economies, we've witnessed kind of the decoupling between economic growth and then the CO2 emissions. But what's actually more important is to actually go into the absolutely decoupling of economic growth and the use of natural resources. So in that regard, that's a trickier part. We can see that, for example, the Nordic countries have been decoupling economic growth from CO2 emissions since the late 1990s, I recall. And that's just because of the two things. The first is kind of the efficiency improvements in the production structure, and that's the traditional innovation game. And then the other part is exporting some of our activities that tended to be run within the Nordics. So hence the real question is whether we can actually achieve absolute decoupling within the global sphere. And again, to try to aim for it and to go towards that, we need more innovations. We need to become more efficient in utilizing the technologies, and we need to have more efficient technologies at hand. That's pretty much the only course of action we can take, and that's why we should take kind of all the measures into use to promote innovation and then the scale up of the innovative technologies and solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Heinrich again. Okay.
On exactly that, what Jari was just saying, I would like to hear much more like the message that we need more innovations in terms of regulation, market regulations, because that will drive the innovations. I too often hear from conservative parties, we need more technology, we need more innovation, then they wait and wait and wait. But the basic driver is to set up those market conditions that those innovations will become feasible and help companies to earn money with that one. So that might be like a little wish to your kind of communication talk and ask more about the market regulations will foster those innovations and technologies that will help a lot, I guess.
Thank you, Heinrich. So yeah, so basically you are saying we need to enable the innovations and technologies so that basically we have a speed up. Jay, you have a lot to do with, I think, scientists, governments, incubators, investors, business leaders. So what is required from whom to basically achieve this vision?
Thanks, Jana. Yeah, I think I'm broadly in agreement actually with the other panelists, because technology innovation alone can't address the climate challenge. And you mentioned all these different stakeholders, and I think it's an interesting observation that we work with these, because it demonstrates this nexus that we find between these different stakeholders that are all contributing to the innovation ecosystem. It's not only technology providers, but it's also incubators. It's those developing business models, policy and financial instruments, as you say, and the climate leaders, you know, and we can even bring into this in today's modern era influencers. But we need ways to combine the efforts of all of these stakeholders towards a common goal. And it is, of course, it's just to be clear, it's extremely important that we look at our national emissions, and we need all stakeholders on board with this process. I think there are two key actions that we can take to help us meet the Paris goals. The first is for each stakeholder involved to identify where they are in the innovation space. Are they focusing on existing large sources of emissions and what can be done to optimize these? Or are they also focusing on providers of new solutions and the new opportunities that they bring in the context of the fourth industrial revolution? The second is to identify whether they're approaching innovation from the perspective of existing sectors and systems. And we've talked about the Global South and that the challenges there are very different. And how can we apply our innovations to entirely different societies? And also, we think of this in terms of the 11 billion filter. How does it apply to 11 billion people? So are all these stakeholders considering it in terms of existing sectors, or are they also considering the human needs that need to be addressed under a 1.5 degree strategy? And I think that this sounds simple. It's actually quite challenging, and because many are not looking from these different aspects. But by doing these two things, every stakeholder can explore their role and also expand the innovation space. In order to move more rapidly, as we say, we need this acceleration in order to more rapidly identify and support the innovations that are not only crucial to meeting the Paris goals, but as Janos pointed out, represent the opportunities of tomorrow. And I think lastly, I think a good starting point would be that support for incubators and innovation hubs will be a crucial part of this journey, because they are key to providing solutions, and not only technological solutions, but also business models, etc. And they are also key to steering investments. So I think that would be a good place to start.
Thank you, Jay. So we will have time for questions from the audience. I think, Leonie, people can ask directly, or should they write in this Q&A feature, right?
I mean, they're welcome to use the Q&A function, but I think if they would like to speak up, then they can also raise their hands, and then we can get them into the discussion if they want to. Perfect. So yeah, we have Q&A now, and after that, every one of you in the panel has opportunity for a closing statement, where you can also consider the questions you are being asked now. So be strong, be brave. You can start asking questions now. I can see a question in the Q&A already. Okay, now I can see it as well. So just give me a second. How serious do you see the danger that the sustainability goals will not be achieved due to autocratic governments and the corruption that still exists in many parts of the world? So who of you wants to answer? You can lift your hand. Marco, please.
Yeah, maybe I can start with a very provocative statement. And I don't know, probably Heinrich will disagree with me, but I think governments won't solve this crisis. I think that has been shown already in the Paris Agreement, that if you look at the national targets of actors, that's far away from the ambition level that we need in order to achieve the climate goals. And so it needs a lot of collaboration with like non-state actors and subnational actors to foster that. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. I won't talk more, but I'm interested to hear your opinion on it.
So I was waiting for Heinrich's hand. Heinrich, please.
Actually, I could state the same thing. Probably governments won't solve the problem, but financial markets and the kind of regulation of the financial markets, which we have in the north as well. So governments in the second place, but people, power of activists and stuff who will start to change the regulation. The idea of financial markets will function. But I guess we can't set by side the autocratic governments in other countries.
Jay.
Thanks, Priscilla. Yeah, I just want to give a little bit of a
we cannot hear you.
That's
I can hear him.
We can. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
Correct now, yeah.
Yeah, just a slightly different perspective on this. If we approach the 1.5 degree target from the low energy demand pathway 1, we see a lot of we see much better synergies with the other sustainable development goals, and that is extremely encouraging as a means to approach this. Also, that if we focus on the climate question, we see benefits in many other areas. So I think that can be seen as a potential positive.
Great, thank you. Marco, you had your hand up. Do you still want to say something, or?
No, I was just too slow to lower it.
Okay. So there are other questions. We heard a lot about creating the conditions for innovation. What do you think the German government could do better in order to support innovation and mitigate climate change? And that doesn't have to be answered by German, so whoever of you wants to say something, feel free. Okay, no one is volunteering, so Heinrich, I'm sorry.
There's a great chance right now, but anyways, the core issue, the core message which we had in our papers was to enlarge the regulations of the market, that market forces could do the work for climate mitigation and change and innovation. So to get up 1 million of people, household owners who put solar on their roofs, or who put like electrical cars in their garage and have like a little storage at home. So the basic idea is to get millions of market participants to earn money with clean energy. That's a big idea which we brought into the CDU, and other parties starting to get this up. Second question, sustainable finance system work as well, is regulation about what companies have to report so that other participants in financial market can make decisions about that one. So again, it's a question of smart regulation to foster those innovations and speed up for climate innovation and mitigation.
Okay, then Marco, I think you were first, right?
Yeah, but Jan, if you have something as an immediate response to Heinrich's statement, you can go first as well, because I wanted to go a bit broader.
Well, maybe just in very brief, we've been helping the International Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Change, which is basically a group of finance ministers kind of addressing and wanting to address the climate issue in terms of what are their tools. And what we've found out in our, and what's kind of what can be recommended to many countries, is that the goals, kind of analyzing and understanding where you have to actually go is important. And then what we've generally recommended to many countries to undertake, and the same applies to the IMF, is basically an environmental tax reform. And in very brief, it just means that you need to put more taxes on emissions, and at the same time you reduce the tax burden from the actions and activities within the economy that you want to have more of. So that's basically corporations and then the employment tax or labor taxes. So that's how you can actually stimulate and use the economic tools to kind of nudge the balances and relative balances within an economy towards reducing emissions and producing more the good things you like. Sorry, I wasn't as brief as I meant.
It's fine, Marco.
Yeah, no, thanks for elaborating on that. I think that was really helpful. So I wanted to make two statements. The first one regarding kind of like the innovation approach, and the second one to Heinrich, but I'll start with the innovation approach towards the initial question. I think one of the other panelists, I don't know who was it, but spoke about like a dynamic solution-based approach. And I think that's really important to emphasize, because innovation at the moment is still often rigid and comes from like a company, and often like this top-down approach that the C-suite is deciding something and then the company is adopting something new. And I think, as I said earlier, also we need like a more decentralized and bottom-up and very like inclusive innovation approach, so that a lot of different actors, specifically from the global south, can participate, and that we develop system on an ongoing basis, and not kind of like developing one system for 10 years and then just putting it there and no one will be able to use it, but that we kind of start the discussion and then build up from the bottom with everyone involved in these systems. So really using a dynamic approach rather than trying to optimize one system. And I think, yeah, Germany is working on that. And again, it's like a global innovation thing. It's nothing that Germany on its own can do, but it's about bringing a lot of actors together and collaborate together. The second point that I wanted to make is that regarding carbon markets or energy markets or whatever markets that we have in the climate sphere, I'm a super big proponent of markets, but I think we also have to recognize that the market or carbon pricing systems that we have at the moment are not really working and are not really free market systems where it's good to find the best solution. But there is a lot of like tempering. Like, for example, one country comes out and says, we have this carbon budget that we can use, and they are not really compatible. And we have like 60 different carbon pricing systems at the moment, where you cannot even compare the units in different systems, because in like one unit of CO2 is generated based on a methodology that is not considered by another country, or also not high quality considered. So it is about, again, like finding developing local solutions, but then also scaling it up and creating global system. And especially if we speak about markets become better when they become broader and there are a lot more market participants, and then they can be a driving force of incentivization. But at the moment, we are not creating these systems at scale as we would need.
Okay, thank you a lot, Marco. Heinrich, you were very motivated in the meantime on answer the question. So yeah, same again. Do you find Armin Laschet's new 15-point plan Turbo for renewable energy sufficiently comprehensive and concrete? Can you answer that again for everyone?
Yes, I don't try to read now my answer, but yes, I find that one. There are the most important measures which other parties have as well, which scientists are saying which are needed. The only thing which is missing are the numbers and targets, but other parties don't have them either. For example, the green ones are talking about 20 gigawatts new energy per year, and what we need is 80, 90 to get to 1,500 terawatt hours in 2030, 2035. So all parties are lacking numbers and targets, but all parties have more or less the same measures. So it's a very good situation for the new parliament and new government to behave and to decide upon those regulations.
Yeah, thank you, Heinrich. I was smiling a bit about the justification. It sounded slightly defensive. So don't you think if the other parties don't have goals and figures, that would be great to be like a front runner and starting to establish that? Is that the plan, or?
For the CDU?
Yeah, I mean,
No.
or for the Klimaunion, how strongly do you focus on that? Or do you plan to focus on that?
Yeah, we have clear numbers on that one. And so it's interesting for the media to find like two sources of information within the CDU or CSU environment. And probably after the elections, we have a kind of like 3 weeks still left to be loyal towards CDU and not talking against what the proposals are right now. But after election process, we could be a little bit more evocative and stating clearer facts and issues and get into discussion a little bit more precise.
So you're suggesting a reunion?
Yeah, we're suggesting that what we really need to solve the climate challenge, we need a stronger parliament, that the member of parliaments understand again what kind of power is in the parliament and not wait until the government which is deciding upon them. So what we need is to repower our members of parliament to go those measures and decide upon that one. Civil society has produced already the big 1.5 legislation package. My former NGO, German Zero, was doing that one. So we are very prepared for getting quickly into the very, very much needed decisions.
Thank you, Heinrich. So we have two other questions. One is, how can a sustainable financial system work? So who volunteers for answering that question?
I see Marco is typing, but I'll give an economist perspective. And of course, the system is designed of people, and it's kind of up to the design parameters. So how do we allow the financial system to work? But kind of from an economist's perspective, the biggest flaw in our global financial system and kind of in the economy as such is that we do not put a kind of sufficient price on externalities. So the cost, kind of the damage caused by a ton of CO2, the estimates vary from 150 to almost 400 kind of dollars per ton of CO2. But currently the highest carbon prices and the all-time high in the EU ETS is 60 euros per ton. So there's a significant difference. So kind of it does lead to the statement that basically the policymakers who are responsible for the design of the markets have not been able to put sufficient price on the externalities, and hence that flaws the whole kind of economic structure that we have. So that's one of the things that needs to be changed. But should we sit and wait for everyone to have sufficient carbon price in place, it would be 2050 and we wouldn't be even close to carbon neutrality. So we need to push both the innovations and the solutions and the policy designs around them at the same time. And that's how we can shift the whole design of the system towards the better.
Thank you, Jana. Does anyone else want to comment? Otherwise, I would go to the next question.
Yeah, I can maybe quickly jump in, although Jana already addressed, I think, the most important dimension. One other thing that I would like to highlight is the way that our systems currently incentivize short-term kind of like performance. So if you look at the CEO, they are getting evaluated kind of like on a quarterly basis. And that discourages even like longer-term investments, because with longer-term investments, you often have like a high upfront cost that doesn't really look good, but then over time you generate returns. And it's the same in the political arena, kind of, that you have like maybe 4-year cycles, which are also kind of quite, I don't know really what the solution is, but it is just systematic right now that we are focusing on like short-term performance rather than on long-term accomplishments. And I don't have a solution to that, but I think that is something that has to be recognized as well and addressed going forward somehow.
All right, thank you. The next question is, what should be decided during the COP26 in Glasgow? Yep, again, please.
So I think there's like one or two key elements of that. The one big frustration for myself was about like carbon markets and climate markets more broadly. So Article 6, it's the article that hasn't been negotiated in like 5 to 6 years now, and it was stalled. And I think we have been speaking about a lot about incentivization and carbon pricing. And although it's not the silver bullet that will solve all of our problems, but I think that's a key accomplishment that needs to be done. One other thing is there are new nationally determined contributions submitted by countries, which hopefully increase ambition over time. So putting more pressure on policymakers to adopt more ambitious levels, because we are far off the 1.5 degree target. We are, I think, on a like 3.2 to 3.5 degree trajectory, and that's horrible. We're way off. So thinking about how can we increase the momentum, and I think there have been a lot of recent events that, like, for example, the German flooding put a lot of political emphasis on it. And I think globally there is a lot more awareness of climate change at the moment. So I think we are at a very interesting point in time, but then also flagging that we have maybe 10 degrees in order to achieve this 1.5 degree target. If not, we won't ever be able to get there in like a closer time. So right now is a really crucial point in time. So I would hope that action generally is accelerated now, and we are not stalling more like we have been doing in previous COPs a lot. And there wasn't a COP last year. So yeah, that's the quick answer. Jana, to you.
Oh, hey.
Yeah, it seems I have the next generation with me as well. But for their sake, I hope that in Glasgow, what's going to happen, there are three things. The first one is as Marco said, the Article 6 that needs to be fixed. Then we're going to have the international stock take. So in practice, that's going to need countries to step forward in their ambition. And we've already seen a lot of statements to take place that the countries are increasing their ambition. We see the European Union going net zero 2050. But for those countries that haven't already done their pledges right, we need to have the pressure on them, as Marco said. And then the third point is the international climate finance. The developed countries have pledged over and over again to support developing countries in their climate investments. But as of now, we have not witnessed the flows of money or technology or innovations to the global south in the scale that's required and in the scale that has been pledged. So kind of looking forward in terms of getting everyone on board in the fight against climate change, the developed countries do need to be able to stick to their word. And that's what I'm expecting to be kind of rightened in COP26.
Okay, Heinrich wants to add something.
Yeah, I don't believe anymore in climate diplomacy. I think we have to need to change the things at home and create their strong markets that they will like splash over in other countries. So maybe they decide some stuff, but like after being 30 years climate lobbyist and activist, the speed there is not quick enough. And it's much more important that we convince our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues that they understand what's happening right now. This kind of climate consciousness, that's the biggest task, because this will unleash the power to change politics, parliaments, and whatever.
All right. Marco,
we have two
questions.
Because Heinrich, I totally feel your frustration, and I also agree that it's good to have like to develop a local push, but I think there needs also to be a global pull, because with atmospheric commons, with this complex systems that we have, if we're just optimizing local action, then we are just, especially in the global north, we won't have problems with, or we will have it relatively easy. But then in the global south, I think 70% of future energy consumption will come from there, and they won't be able to make that. So maybe we can agree on that. There should be like local solutions developed, but then globally scaled. So systems that have been working in the local context, that we can transfer that through technology transfer. And I think specifically for climate change, it is a global system in the end. It doesn't matter where the emissions are coming from, but that we are using, like we are looking at the global number of emissions and then need to govern that also in like an international setting.
Jay.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in the context of the launch of the UNFCCC's Innovation Hub at COP26, it would be an amazing outcome to see a start of a shift in thinking that is from, only looking at the problems of reducing emissions, but also opening that discussion to how we can focus on the solutions, and not least to open the opportunity to transformative innovation that can leverage kind of moonshot thinking, because this is critical to fill the gap. We need to be looking at this from both sides.
Thank you, Jay. So we have two questions left, and I think then we can go to the closing statements. So one is, effective externality pricing does not incentivize a circular economy necessarily. Does this also need to be part of the solution? So who of you does want to answer this question? Janne.
It was easier to raise my physical hand than the virtual one. We've been looking into circular economy at Citra for at least almost a decade now, and what has been quite difficult is to bring the concept of circular economy from the innovation space towards policy phase. It's not at all easy to design policies to actually stimulate circular economy, and because of the use applications, they're so different. For example, the European Union, that's a directive for waste directive. It does consider some use cases, and it helps in some specific settings, but then again it stands as a blockade to circular economy in other. So in that regard, the policy designs are very difficult, but the proposals that we've found and researched include some kind of taxes and financial incentives for taking new materials into utilization, increasing the landfill payments, and then providing innovation subsidies to developing circular economy practices. But there is no kind of straight line answer like carbon pricing in terms of emissions for circular economy, because it's so heterogeneous in its outset.
Thank you, Janne. There was another question you just answered, and it's like you mentioned the gap between the carbon price in the European Union and the actual long-term cost caused by carbon emission. What do you think is the reason for this gap? So you wrote it already, but you can summarize it again.
Yeah, in a very short, it's both kind of lack of knowledge and experience, but it's moreover it's lack of political will. We have seen, of course, that in the US, the shadow price for carbon has been debated quite a lot, and it's absurdly low, to be blunt. We've seen that in the UK, it was just hiked up quite significantly, actually surprisingly significantly. That's when the research base is developing further and the concept is becoming more and more kind of traditional in policy making. That's how you bring it up. But I would say that the gap between the real cost of emissions and the carbon pricing, it's because of mixed incentives, mixed information, and then lack of political will to actually implement sufficient pricing.
Thank you, Jana. Let's come to the closing statement. So in the case that all participants would forget everything we just said, what will not happen, I hope, what is the key thing you would want them to remember? Jay, do you want to start?
I absolutely can. Well, since this is the closing statement, I would just like to say thank you very much for the fascinating conversation. It's been a real pleasure to discuss this with all of you. We have a lot of work to do, of course. We know that. I come at this from a Swedish perspective also, and can kind of recap that we've seen through the partnership that we have with the Swedish Energy Agency that small Nordic countries may have actually much more potential than they realize. And I think that should not be underestimated. Germany's also been a very important partner to us, and we're working with many of the other members of Mission Innovation as well. I think it is really substantial change that the UNFCCC is launching its Innovation Hub at COP26. And through that, it's clear that this idea of an expanded innovation space where we look at dynamic solutions that have human needs in focus can benefit all countries, both in the global north and the global south. So I'm cautiously optimistic, and we, as an initiative, are very much welcome any input and comments on this. This is very much a collaborative effort.
Thank you, Jay. So I see some collaboration approach, very much appreciated. So yeah, the next one I would say, Jana.
Yep, I think I'll keep it very brief. Essentially, what we will need to solve all this is basically three categories or three types of solutions. The first one is that we need to find the ways to become much more efficient and we need to boost the productivity to produce more with less. That's something we just need to find the solutions to, and that's of course a big family of different solutions. Then, as fast as possible, we need to get rid of fossil fuels and fossil raw materials. So that's another large family of different solutions that are required as soon as possible. And then as a third family of solutions, we also need the solutions that help us to take carbon out of the atmosphere. So basically, we need to also find the solutions to boost carbon sinks, both natural and then technical. That's of course something that's coming after we've done everything we can to cut our emissions, but that's something that I'm afraid we'll just need to resort to towards the end of or towards 2050. And to get all these three families of solutions up and running and flying, we really need two types of innovation. The first one is, of course, the technological innovation that we've spoken quite a lot about today. But the second one is the policy innovation. We need to find the policies that stimulate the innovation, and we need to find and implement the policies that do really help us scale up the innovations faster within countries and across countries. And that's the recipe that we will need to be better in embarking on in the future.
Thank you, Jana. Because we talked about policy, Heinrich, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I've also more than 3 points. I think it's more about bringing innovations to market than talking about new innovations. And second one, it's more about speeding up the need for regulations. So talking about that kind of issue. And the third one is we have to have a lot more communication about those kind of issues, how we stimulate the market and the market participants that existing technology and maybe also new technology will get the access to a mass market, and then we will have a big chance to solve our climate crisis.
Thank you, Heinrich. Marco.
Yeah, I try to find things that haven't been said. I agree with all the statements, and also thank a lot for the excellent discussion here with the panelists and also the great questions from the audience. It's really nice to interact as well. And yeah, just wanted to say thank you for having me. So I think what my key takeaway from all of this is that we need systemic change to create kind of like transparent and inclusive systems to foster, and I think like the focus is still on global coordination and governance of our atmospheric commons. I think that's how I would summarize it in one sentence. And then for that, we need to scale systems that enable kind of dynamic solution-based approaches, and yeah, and that relates to the financing of solutions, and then also like to the innovation approach, that we are not approaching it with like a single mindset of like, this is how we develop the solution, but we just try and keep growing and then also apply things in the local setting and try to scale them to the global level. And I think then the absolutely essential question that is neglected quite a lot, and I think Jana was raising it before, like we have to stop burning fossil fuels. That's like the single sentence, and everything else that we're doing needs to be compatible with this one message, and we have very limited time.
Great. I think we have a lot of food for thought. Thank you a lot for your insights and interesting discussions. Jay, Jana, Heinrich, Marco, thank you a lot. And also again, Leonie, and to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, everyone that contributed to this event, and also to the participants. Thanks for being here. I would give back to Leonie.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now also from the side of the regional program Nordic countries of Konrad Adenauer Foundation, I would really like to thank all of the participants of this panel, as well as Christian Hübner, who held the keynote for us in the very beginning. Thank you for participating. I will put you as a spotlight so everyone can see as well. Especially on a Saturday, Saturday afternoon, and in some cases also Saturday morning, Marco from the US. Yeah, I hope that all the participants that were listening to this panel discussion have now great insights into our future, which is hopefully fossil-free, climate neutral, and a lot better than we can even imagine. So yeah, thank you a lot also for your great questions that really stimulated the discussion, I think. And with these words, I would like to close the session and wish you all a very nice Saturday afternoon and rest of the weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.